So, this all happened way back in the late 1990s, when I was a college sophomore. Me and the girl I was dating at the time had been going steady for about 8 months. And since she was my real first girlfriend, my mom was pretty keen to meet her. And what better time than the holidays to introduce her to the folks? During the week before Christmas, my mom's family traditionally held quite a large gathering up at my uncle's place over in Sandy, Oregon, my home state. Pretty much all of my extended family headed out there year after year from all over the Portland area. And since they'd gotten word that I was bringing my girlfriend, the hype to meet her was huge. I won't lie, I was kind of nervous that they'd embarrass me in front of her. But that anxiety was totally misplaced. She got on really well with all of them, and despite some playful humiliation when a cousin of mine told her the story of how I literally peed my pants at the Haunted Mansion ride back when I was a kid, they were a credit to me. When it came to driving her back home, she seemed to be more into me than ever. We'd agreed to drive back down to Eugene at like 7 p.m., so I wouldn't be too tired driving back. But since we had such a good time, we stayed way later than we had ever planned to, and didn't get on the road until like 10:30 that evening. In the hopes of making the journey a little faster, I ended up taking the Oregon 211 instead of just sticking to the I-5 South for the whole drive. Annoyingly, this did not actually make the journey any faster, but point being, the 211 was pretty much surrounded by farms, or these huge swaths of dense pine forest. As you can imagine, big stretches of it aren't lit very well at all, and for some parts of the drive, we were moving through complete darkness, saved only by our car's headlights. But honestly, I wasn't all that worried about it. I was pretty good at reading a map, and once I was back on the I-5, a road I know pretty well, I figured everything would be all good. So we're just cruising along, in high spirits, talking about how goofy some of my family were, but generally my girlfriend was singing their praises, telling how she could not wait to meet them again. It's right around then that we hit a section of highway that descends down this big old hill, leading up to the bridge crossing over Deep Creek. There, the highway is sandwiched by some very dense forest, the densest you're likely to ever see, and there is absolutely nothing lighting up the highway. So the only thing we could see from the front seats of the car is like maybe 20 to 30 feet that our headlights are illuminating, and pretty much nothing else. But like I said, we're in high spirits, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Right as the highway starts to level off, something darts across the front of us so fast and so suddenly that I barely missed smashing into it. I brake so hard that I almost gave the pair of us a whiplash. Then, when we're both stopped, both me and my girlfriend are in a complete frenzy of, oh my, did you see that? What was that? There are plenty of deer in that area of Oregon, plenty of coyotes too. But the thing that ran out in front of us was way too big to be a coyote, and something about the way it moved gave me this gut feeling that it was not a deer either. The shape was just too slender, almost like whatever was out there had moved on 2 legs, not 4. Now, next thing, and I know how completely dumb this sounds in retrospect, but my curiosity just got the better of me. I decided that I wanted to investigate. So, again, this was also incredibly dumb. I turned the car like 90 degrees on the highway so I could point our headlights into the woods. Yes, this could have caused a horrible accident if another car had come along at the same time I was doing this. But was I thinking straight at the time? Of course not. You see, as a kid growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I'd heard a lot of stories about Bigfoot and Sasquatch. I'd be lying if I said they didn't capture my imagination. Now, I'm not saying that I thought I'd caught a glimpse of a Gigantopithecus or anything. I know the stories are mostly exact that. Just stories. But part of me just wanted to be sure. So, like I said, I turned my car 90 degrees, turned on my high beams, and stepped out of the driver's side onto the highway. I stare off into the trees for a minute or two, but I don't see anything. Nothing is moving. The whole scene was as quiet as the grave. But as I'm looking, I just get this feeling in the pit of my stomach and start to feel as if I'd made a huge error of judgment. It was one of the most intensely terrifying feelings that I've ever felt in my life. A feeling like I was being watched by something predatory. I know it's a huge cliche, and the whole "I felt like I was being watched" thing is such a tired old trope, but I really don't know any other way to phrase it. My heart was pounding. The hairs on the back of my neck are now standing on end, and my guts turned to ice. Without turning my back on the woods, where I expected the danger to come from, I started edging back towards the car. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, I practically jump out of my skin when I hear the car's horn let off one long, excruciatingly loud extended blast. I mean, it scared me so bad that I almost straight up peed my pants. Haunted Mansion style, like when I was a kid. My first thought was that my girlfriend has ended up leaning on the horn as she climbed over into the driver's seat for some reason, maybe to get my attention. She'd done that once or twice before. But as I turned back around, she's still on the passenger side, but that she's actually leaning over to push on the horn in what was evidently a frenzied attempt to get my attention. I run back to the car and ask her if she's okay. She doesn't say a single word to me. She points off to a spot about 50 feet away from where we were parked in. I spin my head around to see what she's pointing at. That's when I see it. What was, without a shadow of a doubt, the thing that had run in front of our car just a few minutes prior. Lit up by the residual light of our high beams, what I saw was really, obviously a man, but he was covered in animal fur. What looked like a mishmash of deer skins, bear skins, and elk skins, and on his head, secured in a way I'm not even sure of, were these antlers. At the time, because of how close it was to the holidays, I remember the words "Reindeer Man" just kind of flashing through my head. Maybe in the naive hope that the dude was dressed that way out of some misdirected festive spirit. But he certainly didn't seem in any kind of festive spirit. Not in the least bit. Like, I couldn't see his eyes because the weird kind of head covering he had on. But I could see his mouth. And at first, he kind of looked like he was giving us a smile. Only as I looked, I could see it wasn't a smile at all. This guy was just baring his teeth at us, like the way chimps do, as some kind of warning. After that, he turned and walked off into the forest. Obviously, right after that, me and my girlfriend just got out of there, got back on the road towards the I-5. It took us both a while to calm our nerves, but my girlfriend was particularly shaken up. That's because she'd seen something that I had not. And as we drove on, she explained exactly what that was. While I'd been staring off into the woods, looking for Sasquatch or whatever, she noticed him out of her peripheral vision, but was basically frozen in fear for a moment or two as she watched him slowly walk towards me. Or rather, walking isn't the right word. From how she described it, this guy was stalking, the way a hunter might stalk a deer. The way she put it, she had to summon pretty much all of her courage to be able to lean over and honk the horn the way she did. Then, when Reindeer Man had heard the honking, he backed off a little, and before I saw him, like I said, he just kind of froze in place before disappearing. I did a fair amount of online research when I got home to try and find out if anybody else had any run-ins with this guy, but there was absolutely nothing online about him. There are plenty of crazy survivalist types up here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm guessing he was one of those. But they tend to be pretty open about their existence. Sometimes even advertise themselves as militiamen or whatever. Whereas the reindeer man seemed like he was living completely off the grid. I don't live in Oregon anymore. Me and my girlfriend during the encounter broke up at the end of college. But when we were still together, I happened to be driving down towards Eugene. I always avoided the stretch of highway that I saw the reindeer man on. I've told this story a lot over the years, and some people honestly just think I'm making it up, like a campfire tale or something. But it's not a tale. It's not made up. And it's definitely not just intended to be some dumb, spoopy story. It's most definitely a warning to anybody traveling on that road at night. Because if my girlfriend wasn't with me when he ran out in front of the car, if she wasn't there to spot him before he crept up on me, only to scare him off with a blast of the horn, I honestly might not be here to warn you. So please, this holiday season, drive careful, drive slow, and do not stop, for any reason, on dark, deserted stretches of forest highway. Back when I was 16, 17, and even up to 18, my father and I were very close. In fact, we would often, instead of getting hotels or anything like that, we would just camp out on the side of the road. Literally, my dad would pull over, and we would just walk, maybe 200 yards into the woods, pitch a tent, and there we go. We'd done this more times than I could possibly count, so this wasn't scary for any of us. We were pretty well versed in the outdoors, camping in many areas that were uncomfortable to many people, just kind of out there, many times along the highway because of the long road trips we used to make. We often didn't have time to find a hotel, or want to. My dad and I were much more adventurous, and found the thrill of hiking and sleeping in the woods much more exciting. However, we did have one bad experience. We were in Northern California, somewhere north of Sacramento to be exact, but not quite to the Oregon border yet. We had pulled over somewhere along the road, and we decided to camp out, probably about 100 feet or so from the road. I remember that very distinctly, because this time we had camped much closer to the truck. I think it was because my dad wanted to make sure he can get his supplies easier, for whatever reason this time, and the highway was much more audible. So, everything was normal. We fell asleep that night, and as we were getting up the next morning dismantling the tent, my father, who had walked off a bit in the woods to go explore and go relieve himself in the morning, was running back to me, saying we gotta double time it and load the truck up. Somebody is coming after us. I just listened to my dad, because he's never fearful in the woods. So we loaded up the truck. I kept trying to look back, but did not see anything. We loaded up in probably about 10 minutes, which is record time for both of us. We got out of there and back on the road. My dad seemed very unnerved, very panicked, very unlike him in nature. He's always extremely relaxed, very knowledgeable, very secure in this environment. For him to act like this, something was clearly off. I began poking and prodding for answers, and after a few minutes, he opened up. He said he saw about an 8 to 9 foot tall man, what he described as covered in animal skins, or maybe it was like an upright walking deer. He wasn't too sure, but it looked like a man with large antlers or a headpiece. I remember being so confused, but he said this man's face was all wrong, distorted, and glowing white eyes. What was weird with his description is he said that this 8 to 9 foot tall man was so covered in these animal skins It was hard to tell if he was really that hairy, or just so well disguised in animal skins, and said it looks like he had a crude axe in his right hand that he was dragging against the ground. When I tried to ask more about the purpose of this man being out there, that maybe somehow we had encroached on his territory, my father dismissed that, and said judging by the look in his eyes and his face, he looked partially human, but something else. I never knew what my father meant. Now that I'm much older, and that experience is so far in the past, I almost wonder if he's speaking about a Wendigo, since I know so much about them now. Unfortunately, my father passed away only 2 years after I turned 18. It was right before my 21st birthday party, actually, and so I'll always wonder what he truly saw in the woods that day. Could it have been a Wendigo? Could it have been a Sasquatch? Or something else entirely? In 2011, me and my best friend saw what we believed to be a living, breathing dinosaur, some sort of predatory raptor of some kind. We were visiting the Grand Canyon National State Park, and if you didn't know, the park is very expansive, lots of time to travel, lots of places to explore and to go to. My friend and I spent many days going all over, exploring as much as we could. At one point, it was late afternoon, sometime between 3 and 5 p.m. The sun in the sky was beginning to set in the evening, but it wasn't quite evening yet, which is why I say late afternoon. We were sitting in this kind of canyon-like area. As we were sitting, collecting our thoughts, talking, and discussing the area we wanted to explore next, while upping on some water, my friend pointed out something watching us from the rocks above. I looked, following where his finger was pointing, and sure enough, something stuck out that looked like a large reptile from between the rocks. At first, we thought it was just a misidentification of maybe the environment or surrounding. Maybe, from the distance, it was just a large rock that appeared to be a reptile. We both began making comments saying how weird and out of place it looked, until it moved, and moved very much. Actually, its entire body began to move, and then it moved out in the open, between the rocks. My friend and I got a pretty good look at it. The coloration is very similar to that of an alligator or crocodile, a deep green, except it was closer to black than it was a green, so much darker, very heavy set, very muscly, and almost identical to that of a raptor. And I know this might sound cheesy, but the only dinosaur reference I could think that would give you an idea is Jurassic Park. It didn't exactly look like a raptor from that movie or that series, but you kind of get the idea. It looked exactly like some sort of predatory dinosaur, some carnivorous lizard that would have eaten us. This thing wasn't small by any means. It stood on 2 legs, hunched over, had its arms tucked into its body, and had a very large head. This wasn't a T-Rex, obviously, but it was larger than my friend and I, who were both 6'1" and 6 foot respectively. This thing stared at us, and was maybe 70 feet away, had very piercing yellow eyes, and dark skin like I said. We never really saw much of its teeth, but there were sharp teeth protruding from each jaw, kind of like the way a crocodile does. It just stared at us, kind of showing somewhat interest, and then maybe after 20 to 30 seconds, its attention was immediately shot over to its left, clearly disturbed by something, looked back at us, and then ran off between the rocks in the opposite direction. My friend and I used that moment as the perfect chance to flee, freaking out, not exactly sure what we had just seen. After we spent the rest of the day talking about it and going back to get out of there, we came to the conclusion that we believe we saw a living, breathing dinosaur, something we thought was extinct, but we have no way to actually come to any other conclusion than that. Nothing else fits the description we saw. if it was a lizard, it was sure the biggest lizard, most dinosaur-like looking lizard we had ever seen in our lives. And I'm pretty sure from pop culture and movies that there's only a few things that can remotely look like a dinosaur. And if it looks like a dinosaur, it probably is. So in the past year or so, I've been listening to your show, and I believe you have a couple episodes here and there that talk about dinosaur sightings, but it doesn't sound like a lot. So, I've been meaning to do this for a while, but I thought I would ask your opinion. Is it possible that my best friend and I actually saw a real living dinosaur? Possibly, there might be a small population of raptors living out here in the wilderness of Arizona. I mean, there's plenty of coverage and caves to hide in, but isn't it weird that nobody has really seen one, or at least reported of it? I don't know. I guess it's possible that a small sect of them could still be alive. I just don't know. Hello. I have family that live and work down in central Costa Rica. If you've never been there, it's beautiful. If you like hot, humid jungles, there's a lot to see, and it's very similar to ever being to Hawaii if you've ever been there either. But other than that, I have nothing but positive things to say about my experience, which leads me to my story. I believe that my wife and I saw a living, breathing pterosaur flying in the sky, heading north. We were exploring around in the jungles, not too far off from where my family lives, admiring all the beauty, sights, and sounds. We weren't in the thicket of the jungle, like exploring with machetes and whatnot. We were close by to civilization, just traversing a little bit, exploring what we could, and before us was an open area that led to ocean, where my wife immediately spotted something large flying in the sky and wondered if there are such things as large tropical birds that traverse the country. Upon showing me, I realized even from the distance, the shape was wrong, and it was far too large to be a bird. I mean, if it was a bird, it was clearly the largest bird I've ever seen in my life. Basically Quetzalcoatl, if you will. When we looked at it, which we had plenty of time because it was taking its sweet time flying across the sky, heading north, it looked exactly like you'd see a pterosaur. Just look up any illustration of a pterosaur. That's pretty much it. Long webbed wings, and a small tail right behind it that kind of had a spade shape at the end. A very long duckbill head, with even a crest at the top. It was easily hundreds of feet away, but high enough in the sky that gave away everything about its silhouette and shape. We were amazed by this, and talked to several of the locals afterwards. Many of them have also seen the same thing, and they too believe there are pterosaurs that still exist and inhabit the jungles of Costa Rica and other areas of Central America. Talk about incredible. You seem to be the expert on all things cryptids. Or at least I hope. For the sake of my sanity, maybe you can provide some answers with what I saw that day. So I'll give you some backstory. My name is Dean, and I had a pretty rough upbringing on eastern Texas. In fact, even all the way up to my mid-20s, was partying, drugs, alcohol, sex, debauchery, 3-day benders, if not more. Absolutely out of control. I grew up in a very bad environment, so it just very well translated into my adulthood. Well, fortunately, I had some close relatives who do care about my well-being, and just came into a situation where they could take me in, care for me, and kind of act as my rehab. So, I decided to take them up on the offer, having finally hit rock bottom and wanted to clean myself up. This relative of mine lived around 45 minutes north of Orlando, Florida, so I took a Greyhound bus there and spent almost a year there, cleaning myself up, changing my life around, and now I'm a much better person for it. Even having a dark past, it teaches you a lot of things about yourself. But enough about my background. As I was staying with this relative, they were kind enough to hook me up with a job from a friend of theirs who owned a very small company. I won't give the name or the area, but it was north of where I was living, so I made beautiful morning and afternoon commutes back and forth. One day, I saw something in the wilderness of Florida that will forever make me question what really exists out there. I was driving up there in the morning, heading north, on the Emeralda Island Road, which this entire stretch of road is all marsh conservation area. It's pretty wild, and there's a lot of lakes and water around, like Lake Eustis and Lake Griffin, for example. As I'm driving, I noticed a black figure off to the side of my vehicle, running in the brush, keeping low. There are many sections of this marsh land that have no trees, so that means something big was purposely keeping low and keeping stealthy, but enough that I could still see a large shape keeping parallel with my vehicle and even speed. I began to get kind of concerned. What could it have been? I kept looking over out of curiosity, and the more I looked, the more concerned I grew, because this thing seemed to be intelligent, ducking behind brush, hiding, but also keeping up with my vehicle, almost crawling at an insane speed. I was thinking it might be a giant lizard or alligator, or maybe a huge snake. I wasn't sure. Once I drove into certain sections of the road that were covered in heavy foliage, I began to truly see the shape and silhouette of what it was. It appeared to be some sort of dinosaur-looking thing, or dinosaur man thing. I didn't get the best look in the world at this thing, but I did see the silhouette and kind of shape of it. It did look like it was upright, but also kind of looked like a large lizard-looking thing. Maybe dinosaur isn't the right word, but it kind of had a large dinosaur head on a human-like body. It was very large and very bulky. Think like a 9 or 10 foot tall linebacker, just massive broad shoulders and appearing to have a long alligator-like tail. So maybe I saw an alligator man or something. I mean, I've heard stories, but I never believed it. There's also stories of a skunk ape down here, which is, I guess, Bigfoot, but I've never seen that either, so I don't know how much I believe. But I can't refute what I saw this day, even though I didn't get the best look at it, because I was driving, and it was keeping parallel with my vehicle. But something large and man-like, and alligator-looking like, definitely was following me in my car, for quite a distance actually. I'm no Everglades or swamp biologist, but I'm trying to think, what is that size? What is shaped like a big gorilla or a man, but yet has the head of a large dinosaur or alligator, and a long tail trailing behind it, that is also incredibly fast, enough to keep up with a vehicle, and also duck and keep stealth cover behind brush. Very limited brush, might I add. Nothing comes to mind that I know of, so I either A, hallucinated it all, or B, encountered a cryptid of some kind that is natural to the Florida swamp area. Did I encounter an alligator man, or is this a half-man, half-dinosaur? Even entertaining the idea just seems absolutely silly and ridiculous, but I know for a fact I did see something, and it was far too real to just hallucinate. I've been off drugs for a long time, and have never seen anything or any distortion of shapes or phantoms or silhouettes, even when I was on drugs. So for this just to happen out of the blue, and make the brush and everything else around it move, and to see a silhouette like this, there's just no way I was hallucinating. And pair that with the stories of people that I've heard talk about the alligator man in Florida. I don't know. Maybe there really is something around here. I was hoping that by sharing my experience with you, and hopefully you could share it with your audience, that maybe people would give me feedback and provide me with the truth that there are more sightings and encounters of the same cryptid out there, that's either a human dinosaur creature or truly an alligator man that does roam the swamps. Thank you. I've had this same story that my parents also share with me, that I've had going on ever since I was little. For the longest time, I always thought it was a dream, but it was more vivid and real than your imagination could ever conjure up. It begins with me lying in my bed as a little boy, when a bright light suddenly erupts and shines through my window. Then my window opens, and these tall, translucent, very skinny beings enter my room. 4 of them, to be exact. 2 on my left, and 2 on my right. Their faces are indistinguishable, emanating pure light. 4 of them approach my bed simultaneously, almost perfectly choreographed with how they're standing and the movement they make. They approach my bed, nearly a few feet away from me, and that's when I'm engulfed by a white light. The next thing I know, I'm lying on the next thing I can remember is I'm lying naked on a steel gurney or a steel table. Maybe it wasn't a gurney. I can't recall it having any wheels, but it was some sort of slab of steel or metal. I don't remember, but it wasn't cold like you would expect it to be. And these same beings, now more than 4, were surrounding me, standing all around me, and a bright, round, circular, white light overhead, shining down on me, enveloping my vision. These beings, from what I can remember, didn't do anything to me physically. They just surrounded me, spoke in a language I had never heard before in my life, with a kind of voice that I can't even accurately describe. It wasn't like a human voice, where it's either deep or high-pitched. It was almost like multiple voices, simultaneously speaking at once, if that makes any sense. Like the voice had no real definition, but yet there were still words being produced in its own language. I believe that the words or the voices were telepathic, as each of the faces were indistinguishable in features, just all emanating light. This went on for some time, before I was engulfed in a white light again, the same one as before, and I would wake up, soundly in my bed, with all my clothes on, just as I was when I had left. The odd thing about this occurrence is I never felt anything like fear, anything negative. It was always a numbness, a curiosity. I told my parents about it, and they seem to have known, because it's happened to them too, nearly identical. As I've gotten older in life and have aged, I've sought answers, and while many do not have it, many have told me, from what their experiences are, that it sounds like I have dealt with alien abductions. Curious about this finding, I reached out to other supposed alien abductees, and wouldn't you know it, they've all had very similar experiences as mine. Not quite the same. Some being very horrifying and traumatic, while others, they can't really remember much, but nearly identical situations as I. Mine happened often. I can't give you a repeating pattern because, quite frankly, I don't even know or remember how much. But I could tell you, it happened enough times that it was a reoccurring thing for years. This happened every time, just as I described to you, over and over. Always at nighttime, when I was asleep in my bed, from the ages of 5 to 9 years old. And it happened to my parents too. But the odd thing is, my parents and I never sat down and discussed what it is, what it could be, or what it might be. We just all kind of acknowledged that it was a thing, and that was that. No discussing it. I don't know if that was on my parents' end, for the lack of fear or lack of understanding. I'm not sure. And for a while, in my early teenage years, once it had stopped happening, I had suspected for a while that it was indeed my guardian angels. But as I got even older and grew a greater understanding, I realized there must be something more, that could not be the case. I don't know if there's a very specific reason that these beings showed interest in me at such a young age, or what they did with me, since I have no memory of what was going on up there, or wherever it is they took me. I can only assume it was back on their ship. If that's where I was taken to, I'll never know. But my therapist suggested writing this out, just to kind of help process it more and more, and flush out any feelings that might negatively come along with the experience. Thank you for being that outlet for me. A few summers ago, I went out to visit a friend of mine who lives literally in the middle of nowhere in Central Oregon. I don't remember the exact location, but it was somewhere close to Redmond, Oregon, or Bend. Somewhere around there, where it's very desert-like, and nothing but cattle and agriculture for miles and miles. Around there, you'll see pretty much no houses, just empty, desolate farmland that never seems to end. Well, one night, my friend and I were bored and went out exploring into the large empty fields. Like I said, there's nothing out there except cows and old dilapidated houses that once were. While we were out there, the sun was just about fully set. This was summer, so it was probably right around 9 p.m. It wasn't quite night yet, so I would say in the latter half of dusk, where off in the sky, not too far away, but definitely close enough that we would notice it, was what we say a large black triangle just sitting in the sky casually. This was large enough that it both caught our attention. It was most certainly not far away. If you were to put your hands up in the air and do a diamond shape with your thumb and forefinger and put them together, it was about as big as that, sitting up in the sky. Very noticeable for anybody out driving around in the area. But it was just sitting up there in the sky, not moving, just floating there, and it was so dark that it stood out against the dark blue background of the night. My friend and I were practically freaking out. What is that thing? Is that a UFO? Or is there aliens in there? But there was no light emanating from this object. It just stayed like that. And then, after maybe about 60 seconds, is my best guess, of us staring intently at this strange black triangle in the sky, it instantly disappeared. While it was terrifying, I guess, looking back at it, my friend and I, being only 19 and 20, thought it was the coolest thing we had ever seen, since we were kinda into that anyway. You know, the whole Area 51 spiel. Unfortunately, I don't think it was in the sky for more than a minute, maybe 2 at most, and I feel like that's being extremely generous. Unfortunately, none of us had our phones on us, at least to the point where we could put our phones up and take a picture. But then again, there's so many UFO sighting videos and pictures online. I really don't feel like you need our brand of proof to prove to you that these things do exist. If you look up UFO sightings and pictures, you'll see all sorts of similar shaped looking objects online, from dark black triangles to rectangles and just about every other shape and color you can imagine. I don't know about aliens myself, man, but the entire thing was a strange thing to look back on. What a crazy sighting to have had. This occurred back in 2012. So get this. I have older family. Well, they're past now, but when they were alive, these are great-grandparents. They had a small farm or ranch, not too far out of Roswell, New Mexico, right around the exact same time the Roswell crash happened. But get this, before then, or after then, maybe it was right around that time, they were telling me, back when they were alive, and this was before they knew about the Roswell crash, that they were having their cattle abducted. They would see these strange little gray humans running out in their cattle field, taking the cattle, and beaming them up, is what they said. That was their wording. They wouldn't see any spaceships, from what they told me, but they would see their cattle singled out and engulfed by a large white light, and then vanish, as if taken or vaporized. They never saw those cattle again, but they would see these small, naked, gray men walking around their cattle, my great-grandfather even firing at them multiple times. But he told me the disturbing part is that bullets didn't seem to hurt them or affect them. I'm not exactly sure how that worked out, but this plagued them for years until they finally sold everything they owned and moved to a different state entirely. Just thought I would share this with you, since you might find it of interest.